The sandstone walls of Thebes glowed crimson as the merciless Egyptian sun began its descent. Nefertari stood trembling beside her father as he completed the transaction, 13 pieces of silver exchanged for his only daughter. The feared priest Amenhotep's thin lips curled into something resembling satisfaction as he gripped her arm with bony fingers. Her father refused to meet her eyes, his weathered face a mask of resignation. But as the priest led her away, she caught a glimpse of something unexpected in her father's gaze, not shame, but fierce determination. The stone chamber felt like a tomb. Nefertari sat motionless on a thin reed mat, her back pressed against the cool wall. A single oil lamp cast long shadows across the unfamiliar room. 13 hours had passed since her father had handed her to Amenhotep. 13 hours to match the 13 pieces of silver. She slipped her hand beneath her linen shift, feeling for the small clay tablet hidden against her skin. Her fingers traced the familiar etchings, her mother's teachings preserved in clay before the fever took her 5 seasons ago. The tablet was warm from her body heat, almost as if it held her mother's spirit. "You are descended from royal scribes," her mother had whispered during those final lessons. "Never forget your lineage, even when others have." Nefertari closed her eyes, remembering their modest home near the craftsman's quarter. Not grand, but respectable, until her father lost the pharaoh's favor. She had been 12 when they were forced to leave their comfortable house for a cramped dwelling at the city's edge. Her father, once the royal architect, reduced to taking odd construction jobs, growing more withdrawn with each passing season. A single tear traced down her cheek. She had believed they were partners in survival. Each morning she had used her mother's knowledge of healing herbs to create remedies she could sell in the market while her father sought work. Each evening they would share their meager earnings and a simple meal. She had trusted him. "Your new master requires silence," a harsh voice interrupted. The head servant, a pinch-faced woman called Hebet, entered carrying a clay cup and stale bread. "You'll learn the temple rules tomorrow. Eat quickly." Nefertari accepted the offerings without reply. The water was brackish, the bread hard enough to break teeth. "You're fortunate," Hebet continued, watching with evident satisfaction. "Most girls sold to the temple work the grain mills or worse. But the high priest specifically requested you for the scribe's chamber. Your father must have advertised your skills well to earn 13 pieces of silver." Nefertari's head snapped up. "My father spoke of my training as a scribe." "Of course. Why else would Amenhotep want a girl barely into womanhood? Your hands are too soft for real work." Hebet's eyes narrowed, though that can change quickly here. After the woman left, Nefertari pulled out the clay tablet again, turning it over to reveal the family markings on the back, symbols her mother had made her memorize. Her family had once served the royal household for 7 generations as scribes and record keepers. Until her father's disgrace, what had he done to fall so far from grace? Her mother had never spoken of it, and her father maintained a resolute silence on the matter. Yet he had ensured Nefertari continued learning the scribal arts, often bringing home scraps of papyrus for her practice. A memory surfaced, her father watching her copy ancient texts by lamplight, a strange pride in his eyes. "Your hands remember what your blood knows," he had said cryptically. Was that why he had sold her? For her scribal training? But surely the temple had many scribes, far more qualified than a girl of 17 summers. She crushed the stale bread into smaller pieces, forcing herself to eat. Whatever her father's reasons, she was now property of the most feared priest in Thebes. The man whispered to control Pharaoh's ear through dark magic and political cunning. The man whose enemies had a habit of disappearing. "I will survive this," she whispered to the shadow. Her mother had taught her more than just writing and healing. She had taught her patience, observation, the value of knowledge carefully gathered. As the lamp's flame dwindled, Nefertari made a silent vow. She would learn everything about Amenhotep and his temple. She would discover why her father had placed her in the viper's den. And somehow she would turn this betrayal into strength. Outside, a temple bell tolled the midnight hour. In the distance, jackals called to each other across the desert sands, hungry, persistent survivors. Like her, dawn arrived with the sharp clang of bronze against bronze. Nefertari jolted awake as Hebet struck a metal bowl outside her chamber. The sun rises, scribe girl. The priest awaits. Nefertari followed Hebet through a maze of narrow corridors. The temple of Amenhotep was not one building, but a complex courtyards connected to sanctuaries, storage rooms, living quarters, and administrative chambers. The walls rose 3 times the height of a man, decorated with vivid paintings of gods receiving offerings from diminutive humans. They passed laborers carrying water, servants preparing incense, and junior priests with shaved heads and white linen robes. All averted their eyes when Hebet approached. The scribe's chamber opened onto a courtyard with a reflecting pool. 5 men sat cross-legged on reed mats, styluses moving methodically across papyrus sheets. None acknowledged her presence. "Wait here," Hebet ordered, leaving Nefertari at the chamber's edge. A golden ankh hung from a stand near the senior scribe, its polished surface catching the morning light. The symbol of life, yet something about this particular ankh seemed menacing. Its proportions were slightly wrong, the loop at the top too small, giving it the appearance of a golden noose. The new scribe arrives. The voice behind her was cool, precise, like water dripping in a cave. Amenhotep. The priest was tall, his body thin beneath elaborate robes. His head was shaved smooth, but his eyebrows were pronounced, giving his face a perpetually questioning expression. Around his neck hung multiple amulets and symbols of office. The scribes immediately prostrated themselves. Nefertari quickly followed suit, pressing her forehead to the cool stone floor. "Rise, daughter of Ramos." The priest circled her slowly. "You are now in service to the temple and to me. Your father praised your abilities. Let us hope his assessment was accurate." He gestured to the golden ankh. "Do you know what this is? The symbol of life, High Priest. More specifically, it is the key of the Nile, the divine power that separates those who will prosper from those who will perish when the floods come." He lifted the ankh from its stand. "In my hand, it determines who receives blessing and who receives correction." The senior scribe visibly flinched. "You will be assigned to inventory records." Amenhotep continued, "Specifically, the temple's acquisitions and contributions from the nobility." The priest handed her over to an elderly scribe who introduced himself as Ipura. His hands were spotted with age, his back bent from decades hunched over, writing tablets. "The girl will assist with the Eastern storehouse records," Amenhotep instructed Ipura. "And the special accounts." Something meaningful passed between them. "Come, child," Ipura said once the priest departed. "I will show you your duties." The Eastern storehouse was massive, filled with offerings to the gods, or rather to Amenhotep. Gold jewelry, imported cedar, alabaster jars of precious oils, and countless other treasures. Each item must be recorded with its source and value, Ipura explained, showing her the complex system of scrolls and clay seals. Accuracy is essential. As they worked, Nefertari noticed discrepancies between the items recorded and what she observed on the shelves. Certain noble families were listed with smaller contributions than what was clearly present. "The extra portion is the priest's personal due," Ipura whispered, noticing her confusion. "It is not spoken of." At midday, while organizing a shelf of papyri, she discovered a hidden compartment containing scrolls sealed with unusual symbols. "Step away from those." The command came from a temple guard who had appeared silently behind her. Young but stern, with a scar running along his jaw, he blocked her view of the scrolls. "Those are the priest's private records." "I meant no intrusion," she said quickly. "I'm new to my duties." His expression softened slightly. "I am Keti, assigned to the scribe's security. Remember your place, and we need not have difficulties." Later she observed Amenhotep with a richly dressed visitor in the temple garden. The visitor wore the insignia of Pharaoh's household. The high advisor himself comes to consult Amenhotep, an old Hebrew man whispered as he swept nearby. His beard was white, his eyes kind but wary. The priest's influence grows with each season. You speak to me freely, Nefertari observed. I am Simeon, too old and worthless for anyone's notice. He smiled sadly, but I notice everything. Remember that seeing and being seen are different skills. That night, returning to her chamber, Nefertari passed the priest's sanctuary. Through the partially open door, she glimpsed Amenhotep, bent over a brazier, dropping ingredients into flames that burned an unnatural blue. As the smoke rose, he whispered names she recognized from the temple records. Nobles, officials, even members of the royal household. She hurried past, heart pounding. She had been sold not just to a priest, but to a man who wielded power through both political connection and forbidden magic. A man who clearly had plans extending far beyond temple rituals. And somehow her father had placed her directly in his path. Remo stood in the doorway of his empty home, the 13 pieces of silver heavy in his pouch. The weight seemed to pull him toward the earth like a stone tied to a drowning man. The small dwelling, just 2 rooms with a cooking hearth, echoed with Nefertari's reed mat was still neatly rolled in the corner. Her few possessions, a wooden comb, a clay pot of healing salve, writing implements remained where she had left them that morning, not knowing she would never return. He sank onto his sleeping mat, pulling from his tunic a broken amulet, half of a carved scarab beetle split down the middle. Nefertari wore its mate around her neck, the 2 halves forming a whole when joined. He had given them to his wife and daughter years ago, in happier times. After Merit's death, he had taken his wife's half, a way of keeping her close. I have betrayed our daughter, he whispered to the ghost of his wife, but it was the only way. 8 years had passed since his fall from grace. 8 years since he had been the royal architect, designer of temples and palaces, respected by nobles and commoners alike. 8 years since he had discovered the corruption within Pharaoh's inner circle and made the mistake of confronting it directly. He had been working on the new temple complex, Amenhotep's temple, when he discovered the altered specifications. Sacred spaces designed for prayer and offering had been secretly modified to include hidden chambers, secret passages, and listening rooms where priests could spy on petitioners. Worse, he found evidence of funds diverted from Pharaoh's treasury into private coffers. Young and idealistic, he had brought his findings directly to the high advisor, not realizing the man was orchestrating the very corruption he had uncovered. Within days, Ramos found himself accused of the crime he had reported. His property confiscated, his reputation destroyed, his family cast out from their home. Only Merit had stood by him, fierce in her conviction of his innocence. "They fear you because you know the truth," she had told him. "Keep the knowledge safe. The time for justice will come." But Merit had fallen ill during their first winter in poverty. Without access to proper medicine or care, the fever had taken her, leaving Ramos alone with their daughter and a burning coal of vengeance in his heart. He rose now, moving to the back wall of their humble home. Carefully he removed a loose brick, revealing a small cavity. From it he extracted a rolled papyrus, architectural plans of Amenhotep's temple complex. His original designs, meticulously preserved, showing every passage, every hidden chamber, every secret entrance. For years he had waited, watched, planned. The priest's power had grown, his network of influence extending even into Pharaoh's household. But Amenhotep had one weakness, his obsessive record-keeping. The priest documented everything, his bribes, his blackmail, his plots against rivals. Those records, if found and brought before Pharaoh, would mean Amenhotep's execution and vindication for Ramos. But the records were kept deep within the temple, protected by guards and traps. No outsider could reach them. No outsider except the man who had designed the very walls that protected them. A quiet knock interrupted his thought. Quickly returning the plans to their hiding place, Ramos opened the door to find Heneb, a spice merchant whose caravans traveled between Memphis and Thebes. "Is it done?" Heneb asked, his voice low. "She is inside the temple walls," Ramos confirmed, the words like ash in his mouth. "And she has no knowledge of the plan." None. Her shock and pain were genuine. Ramos turned away, unable to meet his friend's eyes. "She believes I betrayed her for silver." "It is better this way," Heneb insisted. "If she were captured and questioned, her ignorance will protect her, and her skills as a scribe will place her exactly where we need her to be. If Amenhotep discovers her connection to me, he won't. Your disgrace was very public. Everyone knows Ramos, the fallen architect, sold his daughter to survive. No one will suspect you placed her there deliberately." Ramos nodded grimly. "What news from the others?" "Nebaman is ready. The Hebrew scholar has translated the ancient texts. We know when Amenhotep will perform the great ceremony, when the temple will be most vulnerable." Heneb placed a hand on Ramos's shoulder. 3 months, my friend. 3 months until your daughter is free and your name is cleared." After Heneb departed, Ramos stared at the silver pieces scattered on the table. Blood money, the price of his daughter's freedom and his redemption. "Forgive me, Nefertari," he whispered. "I pray you will understand when this is finished." Clutching the broken amulet, he stepped out into the gathering darkness. The first phase was complete. Now the most dangerous work would begin. 7 days passed before Nefertari was permitted to handle significant records. 7 days of copying mundane inventories, grain deliveries, linen allocations, daily offerings to the gods. But on the 8th day, Epua summoned her to a secluded chamber deep within the administrative quarter. "You have proven adequately skilled," the elderly scribe acknowledged, unlocking a cedar door with a key worn around his neck. "The high priest has approved your assistance with more sensitive materials." The room beyond was windowless, illuminated by oil lamps that cast flickering shadows across walls, lined with papyrus scrolls. Each shelf was marked with hieroglyphs, indicating contents and dates. In the center stood a stone table covered with open records and calculating stones. "These are the temple's private accounts," Ipur explained, his voice dropping to a whisper, despite their solitude. "Records of special offerings from noble houses and their reciprocal blessings." Nefertari soon understood the cryptic reference. The scrolls detailed donations from prominent families alongside notations of divine interventions on their behalf, appointments to coveted positions, marriages into influential households, favorable judgments in property disputes. "You will help organize the records by family and region," Ipur instructed. "The high priest requires a comprehensive accounting." As she worked through the documents, patterns emerged. Certain families appeared repeatedly, their contributions growing larger while the blessings they received became more significant. One name appeared with disturbing frequency: Senefer, the high advisor to Pharaoh himself. A separate scroll, partially hidden beneath others, caught her attention. Unlike the donation records, this document detailed disciplinary observations, nobles who had refused the temple's guidance. Beside each name were notations of subsequent misfortunes, crop failures, mysterious illnesses, accidents befalling family members. "Those records are not your concern," Ipora warned, noticing her interest. "Focus only on the assigned document." But later, when the old scribe stepped out to consult with a temple official, Nefertari quickly examined the forbidden scroll. The pattern was unmistakable. Those who opposed Amenhotep suffered calamities too convenient to be coincidental. At the bottom of the scroll, she found a name that made her blood freeze: Ramos, royal architect, her father. Beside it, the notation family curse enacted, position and property forfeit, continuing surveillance. She had barely returned the scroll to its position when a shadow fell across the doorway. Not Ipur, but Keti, the temple guard. "The old man sent me to watch while he's gone," he explained, leaning against the doorframe. His eyes tracked her movements with unsettling intensity. "Are you always assigned to the records chamber?" she asked, trying to mask her unease. "I go where I'm needed." His hand rested casually on his copper dagger. "The high priest values loyalty above all else, and you are loyal." Something flickered in his eyes, doubt perhaps, or calculation. "I serve the temple as required." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the corridor. Angry voices, the sound of a struggle. Iketi stepped out briefly, then returned, his expression grim. "A servant accused of stealing temple wine," he explained. "Amenhotep will make an example of him." Later that afternoon, Nefertari witnessed that example. The entire temple staff was assembled in the main courtyard as the accused, a thin boy barely into manhood, was forced to kneel before Amenhotep. The priest held a small alabaster jar. "Theft from the gods cannot be tolerated," Amenhotep announced. "The punishment must serve as instruction to all." He unstoppered the jar and tilted a single drop of dark liquid onto the boy's tongue. Within moments, the servant began to convulse, his limbs trembling violently before he collapsed, eyes rolling back. "He will live," Amenhotep informed the silent assembly. "But the pain will continue for 7 days, 1 day for each measure of wine he stole. Let his suffering remind you all of the price of disloyalty." As the crowd dispersed, Nefertari noticed Keti watching her reaction. His face revealed nothing, but when their eyes met, he gave an almost imperceptible nod toward a small service door. That evening she found a folded papyrus scrap beneath her sleeping mat. On it, in hastily drawn hieroglyphs, "The herb room, midnight." The herb chamber was a small storeroom where medicinal plants were kept for temple use. Nefertari slipped inside at the appointed hour to find Keti waiting, a small lamp casting just enough light to see. "You recognize the poison," he stated without preamble. "I saw it in your face." She hesitated, then nodded. "My mother was skilled in healing. She taught me to recognize certain symptoms. Can you create an antidote?" The question surprised her. "Possibly. Why would you ask?" "Not all of us serve the priest willingly." Keti glanced toward the door. "Remember that, scribe girl. Eyes and ears are everywhere in these walls. Some loyal to Amenhotep, some less so." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Nefertari alone with dangerous knowledge and an even more dangerous suspicion that somewhere within these temple walls, resistance was brewing. 3 weeks passed. Nefertari adapted to the rhythm of temple life, rising before dawn, scribal duties until midday, meals taken in silence, evenings spent in mandatory prayer services. She learned to move invisibly through the complex, eyes downcast, steps quiet, absorbing everything while appearing to notice nothing. She was sorting temple correspondence when a withered hand placed a cup of water beside her work. "The heat affects even the young," said an elderly woman, her grey hair covered by a simple linen scarf. Deep lines carved her face like a dried riverbed. "I am Senet, overseer of the women's quarters." Nefertari had seen her directing the female servants but had never spoken with her. "Thank you for your kindness." "Not kindness, necessity. Amenhotep expects his records kept in perfect order. Thirsty scribes make mistakes." Senet adjusted a bracelet of simple wooden beads on her wrist. "You've adapted well for one so recently arrived." Something in the woman's tone suggested more than casual observation. Nefertari chose her words carefully. "I try to learn quickly." "Indeed." Senet leaned closer, ostensibly examining the papyrus Nefertari was copying. "Some lessons are best learned away from prying eyes." The rooftop drying area, after evening prayers. The rooftop was where temple linens were hung to dry in the hot Egyptian sun. By nightfall, it was typically deserted. Nefertari found Senet waiting behind rows of drying cloths, the old woman's figure barely visible in the darkness. "You've created quite a stir in our little world," Senet said without preamble. "A new scribe with healing knowledge who catches the high priest's attention. Some find it concerning." "I didn't ask to be brought here," Nefertari replied defensively. Few of us did, child. Senet's smile was visible, even in the dim moonlight. Yet here we are, serving a master whose favor shifts like desert sand. The wise among us have learned to assist one another. From her robe, the old woman produced a small wooden scarab. Keep this with you. If you need to send a message, give it to any child in the servants' quarter. Say it's for grandmother. It will reach me. Why would you help me? Let's call it an investment in possibility. Senet glanced toward the distant lights of the palace. I have served in this temple for 30 years. I've watched Amenhotep rise from minor priest to power behind the throne. I've seen his methods grow more ruthless, his ambitions more dangerous. Before Nefertari could respond, a voice called out from the stairway, "Is someone still up here? The linens must be gathered before the dew falls." "We'll speak again," Senet whispered, melting into the shadows. The following day, while delivering completed records to the administrative offices, Nefertari rounded a corner and collided with Keti. Scrolls scattered across the stone floor. "Clumsy girl," he reprimanded loudly, then knelt to help collect the fallen papyri. As they gathered the documents, he pressed something into her palm. "Be more careful," he added for the benefit of passing servants. Later, she examined his gift, a small vial of greenish powder labeled in hieratic script as a remedy for stomach ailments. But Nefertari recognized it as an antidote to the poison Amenhotep had used on the servant boy. That evening, she found the boy, Mena, still suffering in the servants' quarters, his body racked with spasms, his skin clammy. Using water from her own ration, she mixed the antidote and helped him drink it. Within an hour, his trembling subsided. "Why would you risk this?" Mena whispered weakly. "Because no one deserves such suffering," she replied. Though the question had merit, she was risking much for a stranger. "The guard sent you," Mena guessed. "He watches over several of us, those who listen and remember what we hear." The implications were clear. Keti was gathering intelligence from the servants, building his own network within the temple walls. A small child appeared at the doorway, beckoning urgently to Nefertari. Following the girl through narrow service corridors, she was led to a small storeroom where Simeon, the elderly Hebrew, waited. "You help the boy," he stated. "Good. We need healers among us." "Among who?" Nefertari asked, increasingly confused by these clandestine connections. "Those who see Amenhotep for what he truly is." Simeon's weathered face was solemn. "His power grows daily. Soon he will make his final move against Pharaoh himself." How could a priest overthrow Pharaoh? With patience, with poison, with secrets gathered over decades. Simeon sighed heavily. "I was brought here from Canaan 30 years ago. A captive tasked with translating ancient Hebrew texts containing formulas for potions that can enslave the mind. Amenhotep has spent years perfecting these concoctions. A sound in the corridor silenced them. When it passed, Simeon pressed a folded scrap of papyrus into her hand. "A message came for you. From outside." The note contained just 5 hieroglyphs, but Nefertari recognized the hand that had drawn them. Her father's distinctive style, formed by years of architectural precision. The message was simple: "Watch for the rising moon. You have powerful connections, scribe girl," Simeon observed. "Perhaps more than you realize." That night, as she examined the wooden scarab Senet had given her, Nefertari considered her situation with new clarity. She was not alone in this temple of secrets and schemes. A hidden network existed: servants, guards, even officials, people who appeared loyal to Amenhotep but harbored resistance in their hearts. And somehow, impossibly, her father was connected to this web of shadows. The full moon rose over Thebes, bathing the temple in silver light. Nefertari watched from the scribe's courtyard as servants transformed the main sanctuary for an unusual evening ceremony. Expensive imported cedar burned in massive braziers. leopard skins draped over ceremonial chairs, gold vessels polished to mirror brightness reflected the flames. An impressive display, Pora commented, joining her. The high priest hosts the Council of 30 tonight. The royal advisors? Nefertari asked, surprised. These were Egypt's most powerful officials, nobles who guided Pharaoh's decisions on everything from irrigation projects to foreign relations. Indeed, a rare honor for our temple. Ipora's tone remained neutral, but his eyes held warning. You will assist with the serving of refreshments. The high priest requested you specifically. Amenhotep's chambers had been converted into a reception hall. Richly dressed nobles filled the space, their jewelry catching the light as they moved in patterns of subtle alliance and rivalry. Nefertari recognized several names from the temple records, men whose donations had secured them positions of influence. Wine for our esteemed guests, Hebet instructed, handing Nefertari a tray of golden cups. Serve with your eyes lowered. Speak only if addressed directly. As she circulated among the gathering, fragments of conversation reached her ears. Pharaoh's health continues to decline. The royal heir is still too young to assume full authority. A regent will be necessary, perhaps for several years. Sensifer, the high advisor, arrived last, a corpulent man with calculating eyes and a jeweled pectoral so heavy it seemed to pull him toward the earth. The gathering quieted at his entrance. Amenhotep emerged from an inner chamber, resplendent in ceremonial robes and the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, a presumption that would be treasonous in any other context. Yet none of the officials seemed disturbed by this honored counselors, the priest intoned. We gather to ensure Egypt's continued stability in these uncertain times. What followed was a masterful performance. Without directly stating his ambitions, Amenhotep led the conversation toward a single conclusion. When Pharaoh died, Egypt would need a regent trustworthy, pious, and without personal ambition. Someone devoted to the gods and their divine will. Someone like himself. Nefertari moved silently among the guests, refilling cups with the special wine reserved for this occasion. She noticed Amenhotep drank from a separate vessel, as did several officials closest to him in the discussion. The final obstacle remains the commander of the royal guard, Sennefer muttered to Amenhotep during a momentary lull. He remains loyal to the royal bloodline. The commander will see wisdom, Amenhotep replied, or he will experience divine displeasure. Either way, he will not interfere when the time comes. The high advisor's cup was nearly empty. As Nefertari approached to refill it, Amenhotep gave an almost imperceptible nod. She poured the wine, noting a faint, oily sheen on its surface that wasn't present in the other vessels. Later, as the gathering dispersed, she observed Sennefer swaying slightly, his face flushed beyond the effects of ordinary wine. Amenhotep steadied him with a solicitous hand. The evening's excitement has fatigued you, my friend, the priest said smoothly. Rest in our guest chamber tonight. We will continue our discussion in the morning, when your mind is clearer. 2 temple guards led the disoriented advisor away. Clean these vessels personally, Amenhotep instructed Nefertari when the guests had departed. Ensure they are returned to my private storeroom. In the washing area, she carefully examined the cup Nefertari had used. Turning it in the lamplight, she detected a faint residue at the bottom, similar to the sleeping draught her mother had prepared for patients in pain, but more potent. A soft sound made her turn. Khepti stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. The high advisor will wake with a clouded memory and a splitting headache, he said quietly. But he will find himself suddenly amenable to the high priest's suggestions regarding the royal succession. You know what's happening, she whispered. I know enough to be careful. He glanced over his shoulder. As should you. Before she could respond, Khepti was gone. The following morning, Nefertari was summoned to Amenhotep's private study. On his table lay a clay impression of what appeared to be Pharaoh's royal seal. Not the seal itself, but an unauthorized copy that could stamp documents with the king's authority. Amenhotep covered it quickly with a cloth. "You performed well last night. Your attention to detail was noted." "I live to serve the temple," she replied, the expected response. Indeed, his thin smile never reached his eyes. "You will assist with preparations for the upcoming Jubilee ceremony. It will be historic." She understood the implication. The annual celebration of Pharaoh's rule would provide the perfect opportunity for Amenhotep to make his move. With the royal court gathered, the population celebrating, and the carefully cultivated network of compromised officials in place. That evening, Nefertari used the wooden scarab to summon Senet. On a scrap of papyrus, she recorded everything she had witnessed, using the abbreviated script her mother had taught her. "This confirms our fears," Senet murmured, after reading the message. "The priest plans to use the Jubilee to assume power, either by forcing Pharaoh to name him regent, or by ensuring Pharaoh does not survive the ceremony. Can it be stopped?" The old woman's eyes reflected the lamplight. "Perhaps, but we need more than suspicion. We need proof of his treachery, proof that even his corrupted officials cannot ignore. The records in his private chamber are guarded day and night, accessible only to Amenhotep himself." Senet gave her a measured look. "Unless someone had a reason to be there, someone he is beginning to trust." The western construction site buzzed with activity as workers hauled limestone blocks for a new granary. Among them, Ramos blended in seamlessly, another aging laborer, his body bent from years of toil, his face shadowed by a rough linen head covering. None recognized the former royal architect in this dust-covered worker who kept to himself. When the midday break came, Ramos slipped away from the other laborers and made his way to a modest workshop near the edge of the craftsman's quarter. Inside, a stocky, middle-aged man bent over a granite block, carefully chiseling hieroglyphs. "Nebamon," Ramos greeted quietly. The stonecutter straightened, wincing at the pain in his back. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come. I had to be certain I wasn't followed." Ramos closed the workshop door. "What news from the temple district?" "Construction continues on the new western wall. I've been assigned to carve the dedication inscriptions." Nebamon wiped stone dust from his hand. "The temple guards have doubled their patrol since the council meeting 3 nights ago. Then the rumors are true. Amenhotep is making his move." "Yes, the workers whisper that Pharaoh's health fails rapidly, too rapidly to be natural." Nebamon lowered his voice further, "And preparations for an unusually elaborate Jubilee ceremony have begun." Ramos nodded grimly. The perfect moment for Amenhotep to seize power, with the court gathered and the population distracted by celebrations. From beneath his worker's tunic, Ramos withdrew a rolled papyrus, his original architectural plans for the temple complex. Spreading them on Nebamon's work table, he indicated specific sections. "I designed these ventilation shafts to preserve the sacred texts in the inner library. They're too narrow for most men to navigate, but they connect to this storage chamber here." His finger traced the path, "a chamber that, according to your reports, now houses Amenhotep's private records." "You can't seriously plan to enter that way," Nebamon objected. "The main temple grounds are guarded day and night. Even approaching the outer wall would mean certain capture." "Not during the Festival of Lights," Ramos countered. 3 nights from now, when hundreds of lamps and torches will illuminate the temple district, when celebrants will crowd the processional way, when even the guards will be distracted by the spectacle. And once inside, the records you seek will be sealed, protected. That's why I need your help, and this." Ramos produced a small clay tablet, bearing an official seal, "the authorization for your work crew to access the Western Temple grounds for final measurements before the Jubilee." Nebamon examined the tablet. "This looks authentic. Where did you get it?" "Penab has friends in the administrative offices, friends who don't look too closely at documentation bearing the right stamps and signatures." Their planning was interrupted by a coded knock at the workshop door. Nebamon answered to find a young boy, perhaps 10 years old, his thin frame suggesting one of the many orphans who survived by running messages through Thebes. "For the architect," the boy said, handing over a small package wrapped in linen. Inside was a broken piece of pottery with markings that appeared decorative to casual observation, but Ramos recognized them as a simplified map of the temple's guard rotations, along with a message: proof exists in private chamber. Daughter safe, but watched. Priest plans move at Jubilee. Warning, possible traitor among us. From your Hebrew friend? Nebamon asked. From my daughter, Ramos replied, his voice thick with emotion. She's found allies inside the temple walls. That evening, Ramos met with his core conspirators in the cellar beneath Panab's spice shop. The merchant had covered the small windows with heavy cloth and lit a single lamp that cast long shadows across the gathered faces. Beside Panab stood Minkat, once a commander in Pharaoh's army, until a battlefield injury had left him with a permanent limp and a burning resentment of the court that had discarded him. Next to him was Beck, a Hebrew scholar whose knowledge of ancient texts and languages had proven invaluable. Nabamun completed their circle. The priest grows careless in his confidence, Ramoses told them, sharing the intelligence from the temple. He believes himself untouchable, which makes this our moment to strike, or it's a trap. Minkat cautioned. This warning about a traitor concerns me, which is why we tell no one else of our specific plans, Ramos agreed. Not even our allies inside the temple. He unrolled his architectural plans again, now marked with additional notations. I've identified 3 possible entry points. During the Festival of Lights, Nabamun and his workers will approach the western wall, ostensibly to complete measurements for the Jubilee decorations. This will position us near this service entrance. The guards will check your authorization, Minkat pointed out. They'll be occupied with crowd control along the processional route, Panab countered. I've arranged for a particularly enthusiastic group of festival celebrants to create a distraction at the main gate. Once inside, Ramos continued, we'll access the ventilation system here. It will be a tight passage, but it leads directly above Amenhotep's private chamber. If the records exist as my daughter indicates, we can secure them and deliver them to the commander of the Royal Guard. The one official my sources confirm remains uncorrupted. And if you're captured, Beck asked quietly. Ramos's expression hardened. Then you proceed without me. The evidence reaches the commander by any means necessary. As his allies departed one by one through different exits, Ramos remained behind, studying the temple plans by lamplight. Somewhere within those walls, his daughter risked her life gathering information. The thought filled him with both pride and terror. Soon, Nefertari, he whispered. Soon this will end, and I will bring you home. The temple's eastern wing housed Amenhotep's private laboratory, a chamber forbidden to all but his most trusted acolytes. Yet here stood Nefertari, watching the high priest measure powders with meticulous precision. Your mother was a healer, Amenhotep remarked without looking up from his work. Apura tells me you've shown unusual knowledge of medicinal herbs, simple remedies only, high priest, she replied carefully. For fevers and common ailments. He added a dark powder to a mortar and began grinding it with slow, deliberate movements. Then perhaps you will appreciate the more refined applications I have developed. For 2 hours, she observed in silence, as Amenhotep prepared various compounds, explaining each with the detached precision of a master instructing an apprentice. Some were indeed medicinal treatments for pain, inflammation, infection. Others were more sinister concoctions to induce temporary paralysis, hallucinations, uncontrollable terror. And this, he said finally, holding up a ceremonial chalice of beaten gold, is for our most honored guests. The vessel gleamed in the lamplight, its rim encircled with hieroglyphs, invoking Sekhmet, goddess of both healing and destruction. A mild preparation of lotus and mandrake, Amenhotep explained, filling the chalice with wine. It opens the mind to suggestion. The recipient becomes agreeable, particularly useful during delicate negotiations. He demonstrated the precise amount to be added, the method of stirring that left no visible trace. You will prepare this for the Jubilee ceremony, The officials in attendance must be receptive to divine guidance. "You honor me with your trust, High Priest," Nefertari said, lowering her eyes to hide the revulsion she felt. "Not trust, necessity." He fixed her with his penetrating gaze. "Your predecessor became unreliable. Do not make the same mistake." That night, unable to sleep, Nefertari slipped from her chamber and made her way to the servants' quarters. The boy Mena had recovered from his poisoning, but still bore the hollow-eyed look of one who had glimpsed his own mortality. "The same sickness affects Teti now," Mena whispered when she inquired about the other servants. "The priest punished him for spilling oil during a ceremony." In a darkened corner of the servants' dormitory, Nefertari found Teti writhing on a thin mat, his limbs jerking uncontrollably, his breathing shallow. She recognized the symptoms, the same poison used on Mena, derived from a rare desert plant whose effects she had studied in her mother's healing texts. From beneath her robe, she withdrew a small packet containing the antidote she had prepared after observing Amenhotep's laboratory. Working quickly, she mixed it with water and helped Teti drink. "You risk much for a servant," Senet observed, appearing silently beside her. "I risk much for a human being," Nefertari corrected. "No one deserves this suffering." The old woman nodded approvingly. "Come, while the night guards change shifts. There is something you must see." Senet led her through service corridors to a small storage room tucked beneath a stairway. Inside, shelves held ordinary supplies, linen, oil, cleaning material, but Senet moved aside a stack of folded cloth to reveal a small opening in the wall. "The temple has many secrets," she murmured. "Some not even the priest knows about." Beyond the opening lay a narrow passage that connected to Amenhotep's laboratory through a ventilation shaft. Through a small gap in the stonework, they could observe the chamber without being seen. The high priest had returned, accompanied by a junior acolyte. On the work table lay an unrolled papyrus covered with unfamiliar symbols. "These formulations are more potent than the previous batch," Amenhotep was saying, "the effects more permanent. One dose, and the mind becomes clay in the hands of the administrator." "For the pharaoh?" the acolyte asked. "For those who might interfere with divine will." Amenhotep's thin smile was chilling. "The commander of the royal guard remains troublesomely loyal to tradition. He must be helped to see wisdom." Nefertari stifled a gasp. Amenhotep was planning to drug not just court officials, but the commander of Pharaoh's personal guard, removing the last obstacle to his seizure of power. Later, safely back in her chamber, Nefertari examined the small clay tablet Senet had pressed into her hand before they parted. On it was drawn a simple map of the temple's western section, with a specific location marked, a ventilation shaft that connected to the exterior wall. "A message came for you," Senet had whispered. "From outside, they will attempt entry during the Festival of Lights. You must secure the evidence by then." The following morning, as Nefertari delivered completed inventory scrolls to the administrative offices, Teti intercepted her in a quiet corridor. "The priest has been asking questions about you," he warned, his voice barely audible. "About your background, your father. What did you tell him? What everyone believes that you're the daughter of a disgraced architect, sold to the temple out of desperation." His eyes met hers with unusual intensity, but Amenhotep is suspicious by nature. "Be careful in his laboratory. He counts his ingredients and records every preparation." "You've been watching me," she realized. "I watch everyone in these walls. It's how I stay alive." He glanced over his shoulder. "The Festival of Lights approaches. The priest plans something significant. His private records would contain details, but they're kept locked in a chest with a false bottom in his personal chamber." Before she could question him further, voices approached. Teti stepped back, resuming his role as impassive temple guard, and Nefertari continued on her way, mind racing with dangerous knowledge. That evening, as she prepared for sleep, Nefertari felt along the edge of her mother's clay tablet, finding the small depression that allowed her to split it open. Inside the hollow center, she placed a scrap of papyrus containing everything she had learned about Amenhotep's plans and poison. She had taken her first steps down a treacherous path. There could be no turning back. The temple courtyard erupted in frantic activity as royal heralds announced the imminent arrival of Princess Nefertari. Servants rushed to prepare offerings, priests donned ceremonial garments, and Amenhotep emerged from his sanctuary, looking simultaneously pleased and calculating. The princess rarely leaves the palace, Yupur explained, as Nefertari helped arrange papyrus scrolls for the royal blessing ceremony. Her visit is unexpected. Is she coming for the Jubilee preparations? Nefertari asked. No. The old scribe's voice dropped to a whisper. Rumor says she seeks divine intervention. Her marriage negotiations have stalled, and at 20 years she remains unwed, a difficult position for a royal daughter. The princess arrived with minimal ceremony but maximum impact. Unlike the bejeweled nobles who typically visited the temple, Nefertari wore simple linen and only a single pectoral of gold and lapis. Yet her royal bearing was unmistakable, chin lifted, gaze direct, movements graceful but purposeful. Amenhotep greeted her with elaborate deference. Divine daughter of Horus, what blessing do you seek from the gods? Clarity, High Priest. Her voice was surprisingly strong. The gods' guidance in matters of state and family. The blessing ritual proceeded according to tradition. Offerings burned, prayers intoned, sacred texts recited. Nefertari, assigned to record the proceedings, observed the princess closely. Beneath her composed exterior, Nefertari appeared tense, her eyes constantly scanning the temple as if searching for something or someone. When the formal ceremony concluded, Amenhotep invited the princess to a private meal in the temple garden. Nefertari was among the servants selected to attend, responsible for pouring the ceremonial wine. Your father's health concerns the entire kingdom, Amenhotep remarked, as they dined beneath a canopy of flowering vines. The physicians speak of improvement, but the people worry. The people should trust in the gods and in Pharaoh's strength. Nefertari replied smoothly, my father improves daily. Most encouraging. The priest's tone suggested disappointment rather than relief. And the matter of succession remains secure with your brother, though he is young. My brother enjoys excellent tutoring. The princess accepted a date from a silver platter, including lessons in recognizing those who might not have the throne's best interests at heart. The verbal sparring continued through the meal, neither giving ground. As Nefertari refilled the princess's cup, she noticed Amenhotep make a subtle gesture to Thebes, who approached with a special ewer of wine, the same used for honored guests, who left the temple unusually agreeable to the priest's suggestion. Fresh wine for the princess, Thebes announced, moving to pour. In a split-second decision, Nefertari stumbled slightly, bumping against Thebes. The ewer tilted, spilling wine across the stone floor. Clumsy girl, Thebes hissed. Apologies, mistress. Nefertari prostrated herself. The fault is entirely mine. No matter, the princess interjected. I've had sufficient refreshment. Perhaps instead, High Priest, you might show me the temple's renowned healing garden. I understand you cultivate plants found nowhere else in Egypt. The interruption had served its purpose. The doctored wine lay in a puddle rather than in the princess's cup. As servants cleaned the spill, Nefertari caught Nefertari's gaze briefly. The princess's expression revealed nothing, but her eyes held sharp intelligence. Later, as the royal party prepared to depart, disaster struck. The princess, examining a sacred baboon statue, suddenly clutched her stomach and collapsed. Chaos ensued as temple physicians rushed to her side. A seizure, the senior physician declared, perhaps a poisonous insect bite. But Nefertari, observing from the periphery, recognized the symptoms, identical to those suffered by the servants Amenhotep had punished. Somehow, despite the foiled attempt with the wine, the princess had been poisoned. While the physicians argued over treatments, Nefertari slipped away to her quarters and retrieved the antidote she had prepared. Returning to the princess's side required careful maneuvering through the concerned attendants, but she managed to approach under the pretense of bringing fresh linen. This will ease the pain, she whispered, pressing a small vial into the hand of the princess's personal servant. 3 drops in water, administered immediately. The servant hesitated, then, seeing the princess convulse again, made her decision. An hour later, Nefertari's condition had miraculously improved. The temple physicians took credit, but the princess's eyes followed Nefertari as she moved quietly among the servants. As twilight approached, the princess announced she would rest overnight in the temple guest quarters, before returning to the palace. When Nefertari brought fresh clothing to the chamber, she found herself alone with Amenhotep. "You intervened earlier," the princess stated without preamble. "You recognized what afflicted me when the physicians did not." Nefertari hesitated, then bowed her head. "I have some knowledge of healing, Your Highness. And of poisons, it seems." Amenhotep's gaze was penetrating. "Knowledge that saved my life. Why would a temple scribe possess such expertise?" "My mother was a healer. She taught me to recognize symptoms and prepare remedies, including remedies for poisons used exclusively by temple priests." The princess raised an eyebrow. Interest. From beneath her robe, Amenhotep withdrew a necklace, a magnificent collar of gold and carnelian. "A token of royal gratitude," she said, placing it in Nefertari's hands. "And perhaps the beginning of a useful connection." Before Nefertari could respond, the princess continued in a lower voice. "The court fractures into factions. My father's illness divides those loyal to the bloodline from those seeking advantage. Your high priest positions himself carefully among the latter. The Jubilee approaches," Nefertari ventured. "Indeed, a ceremony traditionally reaffirming Pharaoh's divine right to rule." Amenhotep's expression hardened. Some might see opportunity in such a gathering for alternative arrangements. The implications were clear. The princess was fully aware of the political maneuvering surrounding her father's illness and the threat Amenhotep represented. "Eyes and ears in unexpected places can be invaluable, scribe girl," Amenhotep murmured. "Remember that royal favor, once granted, can restore what was unjustly taken, even a father's reputation." Nefertari's heart stuttered. Did the princess know her identity? Her father's history? As if reading her thoughts, Amenhotep smiled enigmatically. "We are finished here. You may go." 2 days until the Festival of Lights. 2 days until her father's planned infiltration. Nefertari worked methodically in the records chamber, her outward calm masking the storm of anxiety within. Since the princess's visit, Amenhotep had kept her close, assigning her organize his most sensitive documents. "The Jubilee ceremony requires perfect record-keeping," he had explained. "Every offering, every participant, every ritual element must be documented precisely." What he didn't say, but what Nefertari now understood, was that the ceremony would serve as cover for his bid for power. The priest was creating a paper trail that would legitimize whatever happened during the Jubilee. While Amenhotep attended the daily temple rituals, Nefertari carefully examined each document before archiving it. Most were unremarkable: inventories, ceremonial instructions, lists of participants, but occasionally she found something revealing: notes on which officials would receive special blessings during the ceremony, records of massive bribes disguised as temple donations, a detailed schedule showing when Pharaoh would be separated from his personal guard. For each incriminating document, she created a duplicate using the thin papyrus and miniature writing tools she had smuggled from the scribe's supplies. These copies she concealed in a wooden chest in the storage room, a chest with a false bottom that she had discovered while organizing temple artifacts. The festival preparations proceed on schedule, Ketty reported when he delivered the midday meal to the records chamber. His words seemed casual, but his eyes conveyed deeper meaning. "All will be ready," she replied, equally measured. When he left, she found a folded papyrus scrap beneath her bread portion. The message was brief. "Northern Wall. Midnight. Bring nothing that can't be abandoned." That night, Nefertari slipped from her sleeping chamber and made her way through darkened corridors to the temple's northern section. Few guards patrolled this area, which housed only storage rooms and servants' quarters. Keti waited in the shadow of a massive column. "You weren't followed?" "No." "What's happening?" "Final preparations. The old Hebrew has translated the last of the priest's secret texts." Keti's voice was tense. "Amenhotep plans something worse than we feared. Not just control of the throne, but a ritual sacrifice to seal his power." "Sacrifice? Who?" "The princess. The priest believes royal blood spilled during the Jubilee will transfer Pharaoh's divine essence to him." Nefertari's blood ran cold. "We must warn her." "Already done. Senet has contacts in the palace." Keti glanced around nervously. "But there's another problem. Someone in our network is reporting to Amenhotep. Information is leaking. Do you know who?" "If I did, they'd be dead." His hand rested on his dagger. "Trust no one completely. Not even me." They parted ways, Nefertari returning to her chamber with new urgency. The following morning, she resumed her work in the records room, but now with a specific purpose, identifying which officials would be present at the Jubilee, which were loyal to the royal family and which had been compromised by Amenhotep. As she worked, the temple buzzed with activity. Extra guards arrived, ostensibly for crowd control during the festival. Massive quantities of wine and food were delivered for the ceremonial feast. Amenhotep himself supervised the preparation of the sanctuary where the most sacred Jubilee rituals would occur. Late in the afternoon, Senet appeared at the records room. "The high priest requests your presence in the laboratory," the old woman announced loudly enough for nearby scribes to hear. Then, as they walked, she whispered, "Be careful, he's preparing the ceremonial wines personally." In the laboratory, Amenhotep stood before a row of ornate vessels, each labeled with hieroglyphs indicating its intended recipient. "Ah, my diligent scribe." He gestured her closer. "You will record the sacred preparations for the Jubilee blessing." For the next 2 hours, Nefertari documented as Amenhotep added various substances to each vessel, some harmless ritual ingredients, others the potent compounds she had learned to recognize. One large ceremonial cup, decorated with royal symbols, received a particularly virulent mixture. "For Pharaoh himself," Amenhotep remarked, seeing her gaze linger on it. "A special blessing to ease his suffering and guide his decisions." A lethal dose, Nefertari realized. Not just control, but elimination. When the preparations were complete, Amenhotep sealed each vessel with wax, impressed with his signet ring. "These will be placed on the offering table during the Jubilee ceremony. You will ensure they reach their designated recipient." After he departed, Nefertari quickly examined the sealed vessels. Breaking the seals would alert Amenhotep to interference. Instead, she memorized the precise placement and markings of each, knowledge that might prove crucial during the ceremony. That evening, as festival preparations reached their peak, Nefertari met briefly with Simeon in a quiet corner of the herb garden. "All is prepared," the old Hebrew confirmed. "The distraction at the main gate will occur as the evening procession begins. Your father and his allies will enter through the western wall. And the evidence? Bring everything to the small shrine of Thoth after the 3rd hour of the ceremony. If all goes well, the commander of the royal guard will be waiting with Princess Nefertari." As darkness fell, Nefertari made her final preparations. She transferred her duplicate records to a thin linen pouch worn beneath her ceremonial robe. She prepared a neutralizing agent for Pharaoh's poisoned cup, concealing the small vial in her sleeve. She memorized the layout of the Jubilee Pavilion, noting all exits and guard positions. The trap was set, but whether Amenhotep or his opponents would be caught in it remained to be seen. The Festival of Lights began at sunset. Throughout Thebes, thousands of oil lamps and torches transformed night into day, their glow reflecting off the Nile like countless stars fallen to earth. The temple complex blazed with linen, its white limestone walls washed in golden light. Nefertari moved through her duties with practiced precision, arranging scrolls for the ceremony while mentally reviewing escape routes and contingency plans. The Jubilee would begin at midnight with Pharaoh's arrival. Until then, temple staff prepared feverishly under Amenhotep's exacting supervision. "You there, scribe girl?" Nefertari turned to find Hebet approaching with 2 temple guards, their expressions grim. "The high priest demands your presence, immediately." Her heart hammering, Nefertari followed them not to Amenhotep's usual chambers, but to a lower level of the temple she had never entered. The air grew cooler, the walls rougher, the passages narrower. They descended a final staircase into what could only be the temple dungeon. Amenhotep waited in a small antechamber, his face illuminated from below by a single oil lamp, creating ghoulish shadows across his features. Beside him stood Keti, his face impassive. "I have always believed," Amenhotep began without preamble, "that true loyalty is rare. Most serve out of fear or ambition, not devotion. Wouldn't you agree, Nefertari, daughter of Ramose?" Ice flooded her veins. He knew. "Your silence confirms it." The priest circled her slowly. "Did you truly believe I wouldn't investigate your background thoroughly? That I wouldn't discover who your father was? Is the disgraced architect who designed this very temple?" "I never concealed my father's identity," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "No. But you concealed your purpose." Amenhotep gestured to a small table where familiar objects lay spread out. Her mother's clay tablet, split open to reveal its hollow center, the duplicate records she had created, the vial of neutralizing agent for the poisoned wine. "Found hidden in your sleeping chamber," the priest continued. Along with this, he held up a small wooden scarab, Senate's messenger token. "Quite an elaborate conspiracy," Amenhotep remarked. "A network of spies within my temple, coordinating with outsiders, all centered around the architect's daughter, placed here deliberately." His thin smile held no warmth. "Did you really believe I wouldn't notice?" "How?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "You may thank your friend." Amenhotep nodded toward Keti. "His loyalty to the temple proved stronger than your amateur seduction." Keti's face remained expressionless, but something flickered in his eyes: regret, apology, or simple satisfaction at a deception well executed. "Take her to the holding cell," Amenhotep ordered. "She'll witness the consequences of her treachery after the ceremony." 2 guards seized Nefertari's arms, dragging her through a heavy wooden door into a narrow corridor lined with cells. They thrust her into the nearest one, the door clanging shut with finality. Alone in the dimly lit cell, Nefertari sank to the stone floor, mind racing. Everything was lost. Her father would walk into a trap. The evidence against Amenhotep was now in his possession. The poisoned wine would be served unimpeded. Hours passed. From her cell she could hear the distant sounds of celebration, drums, chanting, the murmur of crowds gathering for the Jubilee. Occasionally guards passed, ignoring her completely. "Psst, girl," the whisper came from the adjacent cell. Peering through a small gap in the stone wall, Nefertari made out the form of an elderly man. "Simeon?" "No, I am Eleazar." The man's accent marked him as Hebrew, like Simeon. "I heard the guards bring you in." Another victim of the priest's paranoia. "Worse. I was part of a plan to expose his crimes, but he discovered our conspiracy." "Ah," the old man sighed heavily. "Many have tried. The priest's network of informants is vast, his cruelty legendary. I have been here 3 years for translating texts that revealed too much truth." "Did you know Simeon?" "Of course. We were brought to Egypt together, scholars from the same village. He was cleverer than I, finding ways to make himself useful while secretly working against the priest." A dry chuckle. "He always believed justice would come eventually." "It won't now," Nefertari said bitterly. "My father and his allies will walk into a trap. Amenhotep will seize power, perhaps even kill Pharaoh, perhaps, or perhaps not. Something in the old man's tone made her look more closely through the gap. Eleazar was working at the stone floor of his cell, his gnarled fingers prying at what appeared to be a loose block. "The priest thinks he knows all the secrets of this temple," the old man whispered, "but some knowledge predates even him. Your father was not the first architect to build escape routes into sacred walls." With a final effort, Eleazar lifted the stone block, revealing a dark space beneath. These tunnels were built when the first temple stood on this ground, centuries ago. They connect to the Nile for ritual purification. Forgotten by all but a few old scholars, hope flickered in Nefertari's chest. "Can we reach the main temple level? If the gods favor us," Eleazar began squeezing his thin frame through the opening. "Come, before the guards return." As Nefertari prepared to follow him into the unknown passage, rapid footsteps approached her cell. She froze, expecting guards, but instead, Keti appeared, keys in hand. Quickly he hissed, unlocking her door. "We have little time. You betrayed me," she accused. "I betrayed no one." His voice was fierce. "Amenhotep suspected you from the beginning. I had to give him something to maintain his trust. Your messenger token, nothing more. The evidence is safe, hidden where he'll never find it. Why should I believe you now? Because your father is already inside the temple walls, and without your help he'll fail." Keti held out his hand. "Choose, Nefertari. The old tunnel that may go nowhere, or the path I know will lead to Amenhotep's downfall." She hesitated, torn between options, each fraught with potential betrayal. The western wall of the temple complex stood in shadow despite the festival lights blazing elsewhere. Ramos crouched behind a stack of limestone blocks, watching as temple guards checked the credentials of workers entering the grounds. Beside him, Nebamon adjusted his foreman's headcloth, nervously. "Remember," Ramos whispered, "we're here to measure for Jubilee decorations. Nothing more." Nebamon nodded grimly. "And if they search our tool bags, then we fight our way in, or die trying." They joined the small group of laborers Nebamon had assembled, trusted men who understood the risks, but believed in their cause. As they approached the service entrance, Ramos felt the weight of the stone chisel concealed beneath his tunic. The same tool he had used to carve intricate designs in Pharaoh's palace years ago, now repurposed for a more desperate task. The head guard barely glanced at Nebamon's authorization tablet before waving them through. "Be quick. The main ceremony begins at midnight, and all work must be completed before the royal procession arrives." Once inside, they separated as planned. Two men headed toward the eastern courtyard to create a distraction if needed. Nebamon led another pair to the scaffolding along the ceremonial path, ostensibly to take measurements. Ramos, now alone, made his way toward the administrative section of the temple, where Nefertari had indicated the evidence was hidden. He had just reached the shadow of a massive column when a hand gripped his shoulder. Ramos spun, reaching for his chisel, only to find himself face to face with Panab, the merchant who was supposed to be coordinating the distraction at the main gate. "What are you doing here?" Ramos hissed. "Warning you." Panab's usually confident demeanor was shaken. The temple guard captain was just paid a substantial bribe to watch for specific intruders tonight. An architect and his associates. Ramos's blood ran cold. "How did they know? Someone betrayed us. We need to abort now." "No." Ramos's voice was steel. "My daughter is inside these walls. I won't leave without her. If you're captured, then the rest of you proceed with delivering the evidence, if we can still find it." Ramos had surveyed the temple grounds, calculating. "We need to change approach. The ventilation shafts will be watched if they know I designed them. There's another way." Panab pulled him deeper into the shadows. "The merchant's entrance, where deliveries come in. I've bribed the storekeeper. He'll grant us access to the inner corridors." As they changed direction, weaving through crowds of festival workers, Ramos spotted Minkat, the former military commander, approaching with uncharacteristic haste. "Temple guards are arresting Nebemon's workers," Minkat reported. "They're searching for you specifically, Ramos." "And Beck?" Ramos asked, referring to the Hebrew scholar who was supposed to be their language interpreter if needed. Minkat's expression darkened. "Gone. His lodgings empty. His belongings taken. I fear he may have been the betrayer." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Beck had access to their plans, connections to translate messages, knowledge of temple procedures. The perfect informant for Amenhotep. "We continue," Ramos decided, "but we trust no one beyond ourselves now." The merchant's entrance was a flurry of activity, deliveries of wine, food, and offerings streaming in for the Jubilee feast. Peneb led them to a side door where a harried-looking official checked inventory tablets. "Wine from the Delta Estates," Peneb announced with practiced ease, presenting a sealed pottery jar, special reserve for the high priest himself. The official barely looked up, making a mark on his tablet. "Storage room 3. Be quick." Once inside, they moved swiftly through service corridors. Ramos oriented himself using his mental map of the temple layout. The administrative offices would be 2 levels up in the eastern wing. "Guards ahead," Minkat warned, pulling them into a darkened alcove as a patrol passed. "There are too many," Peneb whispered, when the guards had gone. "They've increased security tenfold." "We need a diversion," Ramos decided. "Something to draw them away from the administrative section." Minkat's scarred face creased in a grim smile. "Leave that to me." The oil lamps in the offering hall would create quite a spectacle if overturned. "No harm to innocent people," Ramos insisted. "Smoke and confusion only," Minkat promised. "Give me 10 minutes, then make your move." After Minkat departed, Ramos and Peneb continued deeper into the temple complex. Each corridor, each chamber brought memories flooding back to Ramos. He had designed these spaces, specified the height of these ceilings, calculated the width of these doorways. The temple had been his greatest architectural achievement before his fall from grace. They passed a small garden courtyard where priests prepared for the ceremony, donning elaborate headdresses and rehearsing ritual movements. Beyond that lay a narrow staircase leading to the administrative level. "Wait," Peneb whispered, pulling Ramos into a shadowed recess. "Listen." Voices approached. A man and woman in heated discussion. "Must move now before the ceremony begins," the woman was saying. "The evidence is hidden in the silence, Senate." The man interrupted. "These walls have ears." Ramos's heart leapt. They were discussing the evidence. He peered carefully around the column and glimpsed an elderly woman in servant's garb, speaking with a temple guard. "If your betrayal was discovered, she'll trust no one," the guard was saying. "Especially not me. You had no choice, Keti." Amenhotep suspected her from the beginning. Ramos had heard enough. These people knew about Nefertari, about the evidence, about their entire plan. Whether they were allies or enemies remained unclear, but they clearly knew more than they should. Just then, shouts erupted from the direction of the offering hall. Minkat's diversion had begun. Guards ran toward the commotion, leaving corridors momentarily unattended. "Now," Ramos urged, moving toward the staircase. As they reached the administrative level, a distant sound froze Ramos in his tracks. A woman's voice, barely audible but unmistakable. "Nefertari." His daughter's voice, coming from somewhere below, not above. In that moment, the architectural plans became irrelevant. The evidence secondary. All that mattered was his child. "Change of plan," he told a startled Peneb. "We go down, not up." Midnight approached. The temple's grand ceremonial hall glowed with the light of 100 oil lamps, their flames reflecting off gold-leafed columns and polished alabaster floors. Incense smoke hung in the air like morning mist over the Nile, sweet and heavy. Dignitaries from across Egypt filled the hall, nobles in their finest linens, officials wearing the insignia of their offices, priests from lesser temples come to pay homage. Amenhotep stood before the sacred altar, resplendent in ceremonial regalia that rivaled Pharaoh's own. A golden mask covered his face, an elaborate creation representing Horus. with a curved beak and eyes inlaid with lapis lazuli. Behind the mask, the priest's expression remained hidden, his thoughts unreadable. Nefertari, freshly attired in clean scribal robes, stood among the temple attendants. After her confrontation in the dungeon, Katie had led her through back passages to a small chamber where Senate waited with ceremonial garments and urgent instructions. "Amenhotep believes you're still imprisoned," the old woman had explained. "He plans to bring you before the gathering later as evidence of a conspiracy against him, a plot by enemies of Egypt to destabilize the succession. My father is inside the temple walls," Katie had confirmed, "but the priest's men watch for him. We must proceed carefully." Now, as ceremonial drums began their rhythmic pounding, Nefertari scanned the crowded hall for any sign of her father or his allies. Instead, her gaze found Princess Neferhotep, seated among the royal delegation, her expression carefully neutral but her eyes alert, watchful. The princess had arrived with minimal fanfare, but maximum security. A dozen royal guards, flanking a sedan chair draped with protective amulets. Amenhotep had greeted her with elaborate courtesy, though Nefertari noted he kept his distance, perhaps wary after the failed poisoning attempt. "The ceremony commences," a herald announced. "All prepare for the divine presence of Pharaoh, son of Ra, lord of the two lands." A hush fell over the assembly. From the temple entrance came the slow procession, palace officials bearing standards, priests swinging censers of smoking incense, royal guards with ceremonial spears. And at the center, carried on a golden litter, Pharaoh himself. Nefertari caught her breath. The god-king of Egypt looked far from divine. His frame was thin beneath ornate robes, his face gaunt, his movements those of a man decades older than his 50 years. Yet his eyes remained sharp, taking in the assembly with practiced assessment. As Pharaoh was settled onto his ceremonial throne, Amenhotep approached and prostrated himself 3 times. "Great Horus," in human form, the priest intoned, voice reverberating through his golden mask. "We gather to celebrate your divine rule and the blessings you bestow upon Egypt." The ritual unfolded according to ancient tradition, offerings presented, hymns chanted, symbolic reenactments of the god's great deeds. Throughout, Nefertari moved with the other attendants, helping to present ritual objects, always watching for the moment when the ceremonial wine would be served. During a lull in the proceedings, as musicians played softly, Amenhotep gestured subtly to his chief attendant. The man disappeared briefly, returning with a procession of servers bearing golden chalices on silver trays. "Now comes the blessing of divine favor," Amenhotep announced. "Sacred wine, consecrated to the gods, to strengthen the bonds between the divine and mortal realms." This was the moment when the drugged wine would be distributed to key officials, when Pharaoh would receive his lethal dose. Nefertari tensed, the neutralizing agent concealed in her sleeve, suddenly feeling inadequate against the enormity of the priest's scheme. The servers moved through the assembly with choreographed precision, presenting chalices to designated recipients. Nefertari watched as the special cup intended for Pharaoh was carried forward on its own tray. Just as the server approached the royal throne, a commotion erupted at the temple entrance. Guards rushed forward as a group of nobles arrived late to the ceremony. Among them, Nefertari realized with a jolt, Princess Nefertari, but the princess was already seated with the royal delegation. Nefertari's gaze darted between the 2 identical royal women, one seated calmly beside Pharaoh, the other being escorted in with profuse apologies for her tardiness. The seated princess rose gracefully, her composure unbroken. "Cousin," she called to the newcomer, "how remarkable to find you here, when I was told you remained at the summer palace with your fever." The temple fell silent, attention riveted on the 2 identical royal women. The newcomer's guards moved protectively around her as she replied, "As remarkable as finding you here, cousin, when I personally saw you depart for Alexandria 3 days ago." Amenhotep's golden mask turned from one princess to the other, the priest momentarily frozen in uncertainty, which was the true Princess Nefertari. Sorcery, someone shouted, dark magic in the sacred temple. The ceremonial order dissolved into chaos. Officials backed away from both princesses, guards formed protective circles around Pharaoh, priests began frantic prayers against evil. In the confusion, Nefertari spotted Keti moving purposefully toward the server carrying Pharaoh's special chalice. With a seemingly accidental collision, he knocked the tray, sending the poisoned cup clattering across the stone floor, its contents spilling harmlessly. Amenhotep's voice cut through the disorder, amplified by his ceremonial mask. Silence. This disruption is part of a plot against Egypt's stability. He gestured imperiously toward Nefertari. Behold the architect of this treachery, a spy placed in our sacred temple to undermine the divine succession. All eyes turned to Nefertari standing exposed amid the chaos as temple guards moved to surround her. Temple guards closed in around Nefertari, spears lowered, as Amenhotep's accusation hung in the air. The assembly watched in stunned silence, nobles drawing back from potential danger, royal officials whispering urgently to one another. This woman, Amenhotep continued, his masked face turning toward Pharaoh, infiltrated our sacred temple to disrupt the jubilee and destabilize Egypt's divine order. She represents forces that would see chaos reign over our beloved land. Nefertari stood her ground, heart pounding but mind suddenly, strangely clear. The moment she had prepared for had arrived, though not as planned. I infiltrated nothing, she declared, her voice carrying across the hushed hall. I was sold to this temple by my father, Ramses, the royal architect, who designed these very walls before his unjust disgrace. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Many remembered Rameses's fall from favor, a court scandal from 8 years past. Indeed, she is the daughter of a traitor. Amenhotep seized the admission, a man who betrayed Pharaoh's trust and now sends his child to continue his treachery. The only betrayal here, a commanding voice rang out, is against Egypt herself. The crowd parted as a figure stepped forward from among the workers stationed near a side entrance. Ramses, still in laborer's garb, but standing with the dignity of his former station. 2 temple guards moved to intercept him, but hesitated when royal guards from Princess Nefertari's contingent blocked their path. I designed this temple to honor the gods, Ramses proclaimed. You, Amenhotep, perverted it into a center of corruption and conspiracy. Pharaoh leaned forward on his throne, frail but attentive. Serious accusations, architect. What evidence supports them? From within her robe, Nefertari withdrew the linen pouch containing her copied documents. These records detail bribes disguised as offerings, blackmail of officials, and plans to poison those who oppose the high priest's ambitions, including your majesty. She approached the royal throne, dropping to her knees and offering the papyri with outstretched hands. A royal guard took them, presenting them to Pharaoh's vizier, who began to examine them with narrowed eyes. Forgeries, Amenhotep thundered, created by conspirators to undermine temple authority. Not forgeries, came another voice. Senate stepped forward, her servant's posture abandoned for one of surprising authority. I have served in this temple for 30 years, recording the high priest's activities at the request of the royal spy master. The revelation caused another wave of murmurs. Amenhotep, momentarily unbalanced by this betrayal from an unexpected quarter, regained his composure quickly. These baseless accusations can be verified, Ramses interrupted, by examining the high priest's private records, hidden in a chest with a false bottom in his personal chamber. Amenhotep's masked face turned toward Keti, who stood impassively among the temple guards. You revealed this. After all I have given you, I serve Egypt, not personal ambition, Keti replied steadily. The tension in the hall was palpable, as Pharaoh raised a thin hand. These matters require investigation. Commander, he addressed the leader of his personal guard, Retrieve these private records. Before the commander could respond, one of the two Princess Nefertaris, the one who had arrived second, stepped forward, drawing a sealed papyrus from beneath her robes. "That won't be necessary, father. I have already secured them." She broke the royal seal and unrolled the document, complete records of the high priest's conspiracy to seize power as regent upon your convenient illness. Amenhotep's composure finally shattered. "This is fabrication. Lies created by enemies of the temple. I have served the divine throne faithfully for decades by poisoning court officials who opposed you." The princess's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "By administering slow-acting toxins to Pharaoh himself, disguised as healing tonics." The accusation sent shockwaves through the assembly. Royal guards instinctively tightened their formation around Pharaoh. "Test the ceremonial wine," Nefertari suggested. "The cup intended for Pharaoh contains a lethal dose of the same poison found in his medicine." The royal physician hurried to retrieve the spilled chalice, collecting enough liquid for examination. Amenhotep, sensing his careful plans collapsing, made a desperate gambit. He raised his arms dramatically, his golden mask catching the lamplight. "These conspirators seek to undermine divine authority. The gods themselves have shown me visions of Egypt's enemies gathering." "Remove his mask," Pharaoh commanded suddenly. "Let us see the face of such divine communion." When the temple guards hesitated, royal guards stepped forward. Amenhotep backed away, but found himself surrounded. With nowhere to retreat, he reached up and slowly removed the ceremonial mask himself. His face beneath was not the composed, superior expression he typically wore, but a mask of rage and desperation. The true face of the man behind years of manipulation. "The private chamber has been searched, Majesty," announced the commander of the royal guard, entering with a scroll in hand. "We found this hidden in a compartment beneath the floor. A list of officials to be eliminated after the high priest assumed the regency." Pharaoh's expression hardened. Though physically diminished, the steel that had built and maintained an empire was visible in his eyes. "Amenhotep, high priest of Amun, you stand accused of treason against the throne of Egypt. You will be held until the royal court determines your fate." As royal guards moved to take the priest into custody, Amenhotep's gaze locked with Nefertari's, his eyes promising vengeance even in defeat. "This is not ended," he hissed, as they led him away. The royal guards had barely closed around Amenhotep when the unthinkable happened. With a strength belying his thin frame, the priest broke free of his captors, snatching a ceremonial dagger from the belt of the nearest guard. In one fluid motion, he lunged toward the nearest princess, the one who had arrived second, and seized her, the blade pressed against her throat. "Stand back," he commanded as guards reached for their weapons, "or royal blood spills on sacred ground." The assembly froze. Even Pharaoh's elite guards hesitated, trained to protect the royal family at all costs, now facing an impossible calculation of risk. "Release my daughter," Pharaoh ordered, his voice steady despite his frail appearance. "I will leave this temple unhindered," Amenhotep countered, "with appropriate escorts to ensure my safe passage to the eastern border. Only then will the princess be released." Nefertari observed the hostage princess carefully. Despite the blade at her throat, she showed remarkable composure, her eyes alert rather than terrified. The other princess, the one who had been seated throughout the ceremony, remained equally calm, watching the scene with analytical precision. "You have nowhere to flee," the commander of the royal guard reasoned. "Every known governor, every border post will receive word before you arrive. Then perhaps I shall take more permanent sanctuary." Amenhotep began backing toward the inner sanctuary, dragging the princess with him. In the realm of the gods themselves, his meaning became clear as he retreated toward the sacred altar. In ancient times, human sacrifice had been forbidden, but legends persisted of dark rituals used by priests to call upon primal forces, rituals requiring royal blood. "I studied texts older than this kingdom," Amenhotep called out, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality. Words of power forbidden for millennia. The ceremonial lamps flickered as he began a low chant in a language Nefertari didn't recognize. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop, shadows deepening in the corners. "He recites the binding of shadows," gasped an elderly priest from a neighboring temple. "Ancient magic forbidden since the first dynasty. Whether true sorcery or elaborate performance, the effect was potent. Hardened soldiers and officials alike drew back, superstitious fear overtaking rational thought. Even the royal guards hesitated, unwilling to rush forward against such uncanny display. The princess dies, and her car becomes the vessel for forces beyond your comprehension," Amenhotep threatened, the dagger pressing deeper. Ramose pushed forward through the fearful crowd. "Take me instead," he offered. "The architect who designed your temple. Surely my blood would be a more fitting tribute to your dark gods." Amenhotep's eyes narrowed with recognition. The father offers himself for the daughter. How poetic! His gaze shifted between Ramose and Nefertari. "But perhaps more fitting would be the daughter who betrayed me." "I'll come willingly." Nefertari stepped forward before her father could protest. "Release the princess." "Nefertari, no." Ramose tried to reach her, but royal guards held him back, uncertain what action would least endanger the princess. "A noble gesture," Amenhotep acknowledged. "Approach slowly." As Nefertari moved forward, the hostage princess caught her eye with a subtle but unmistakable glance toward the altar. On its surface lay various ceremonial implements, including a polished metal mirror used to reflect divine light. Understanding dawned. With measured steps, Nefertari drew closer, positioning herself precisely as the princess had indicated. "Stop there," Amenhotep commanded when she was 3 paces away. "Now, Pharaoh, witness the price of opposing the god's chosen servant." The priest's chanting intensified, the shadows in the hall seeming to respond, curling like smoke toward the altar. Whether genuine magic or clever manipulation of incense and lamplight, the effect terrified the onlookers. But Nefertari had spent weeks observing Amenhotep's methods, learning his tricks and deceptions. She recognized the precise herbs burning in the senses, hallucinogens that enhanced suggestibility and fear. "Your magic is but deception," she declared loudly. "Smoke and mirrors to manipulate the credulous." "Silence, girl." Amenhotep snarled, momentarily breaking his mystical persona. "You understand nothing of true power." "I understand enough," she countered, taking another step that positioned her directly before the metal mirror. "I know the antidotes to your poisons. I know how you create visions with burning resins. I know that without your mask and posturing, you are merely a man, a clever, ruthless man, but still mortal." The priest's expression contorted with rage. For a man accustomed to unquestioned authority and fearful obedience, being dismissed so publicly was intolerable. "Then witness real power," he growled, releasing the princess to raise both hands in a dramatic gesture, the dagger still clutched in one. It was the opening they needed. The princess ducked and rolled away with unexpected agility as Nefertari dropped to the floor. Simultaneously, Keti, who had gradually positioned himself at the perfect angle, hurled a spear that had been concealed along his leg. The spear struck not Amenhotep, but the metal mirror, which shattered and fell directly onto the sensors, extinguishing them instantly. The hypnotic smoke dissipated, and with it, the shadows that had seemed to dance at the priest's command. In that moment of shocked silence, father and daughter locked eyes across the chamber, a fleeting connection before chaos erupted anew. Amenhotep, his mystical pretense shattered, but his dangerous cunning intact, lunged not for Nefertari but for Ramose, recognizing the deeper pain he could inflict. "Your family destroyed mine," the priest hissed, as he closed in on the architect. Dagger raised, now balance is restored. Time seemed to slow as Amenhotep lunged toward Ramose, the ceremonial dagger gleaming in the lamplight. Nefertari cried out, too far away to intervene. Royal guards rushed forward, but distance made their effort futile. It was Panab, emerging from the crowd of officials, who saved Ramose. The merchant tackled the architect, both men tumbling to the floor as the dagger sliced through empty air. Amenhotep staggered, off balance from his failed strike. In that crucial moment, Keti seized the priest from behind, pinning his arms. Other guards closed in, wresting the dagger from his grip and forcing him to his knees before Pharaoh. "Enough blood has been spilled in my house of worship," Pharaoh declared, rising slowly from his throne. Though physically diminished, his presence filled the chamber with undeniable authority. "Amenhotep, high priest of Amun, you stand accused of the highest treason conspiracy against the throne of Egypt itself." The ceremonial hall had transformed into an impromptu court of judgment. Officials who had moments before cowered in fear now stepped forward, emboldened by the priest's downfall, eager to distance themselves from his schemes. "The traditional punishment for such crimes," continued Pharaoh, "is death by impalement, a slow end witnessed by all as warning against similar ambition." A murmur of grim approval rippled through the assembly. Amenhotep, for the first serf since Nefertari had known him, showed genuine fear, his composed facade crumbling completely. However, Pharaoh raised a hand. "Blood spilled in haste often leaves questions unanswered. Before judgment is rendered, I would know the full extent of this conspiracy." At his gesture, court scribes brought forward a symbolic object, a golden scale, miniature version of the great balance on which the gods weighed human hearts against the feather of truth. One by one, witnesses came forward to testify about Amenhotep's crimes. Senate described years of observing the priest's gradual corruption of temple practices. Keti detailed the network of blackmail and bribery that extended through every level of government. Temple scribes, suddenly finding their voices, confirmed falsified records and misappropriated offerings. Throughout, Amenhotep knelt in silence, his expression shifting between rage, calculation, and most surprisingly, physical discomfort. Perspiration beaded on his forehead, his breathing becoming increasingly labored. "The priest appears unwell," observed the royal physician, approaching cautiously. "A fitting justice," Nefertari said, recognition dawning. He drank from his own cup earlier in the ceremony, the one meant for his trusted acolytes. The one containing the loyalty draft. "What does this mean?" demanded the commander of the royal guard. "It means," Nefertari explained, "that he has ingested a preparation of blue lotus and mandrake, designed to make the drinker suggestible and compelled to speak truth when questioned directly." Pharaoh's eyes narrowed with interest. "Is this so? It would explain his uncharacteristic loss of control," noted the royal physician. "Such compounds affect the mind's restraint. Then let us use this unexpected advantage," Pharaoh decided. "Amenhotep, how long have you plotted against my throne?" The priest tried resist, but the combination of the drug's effect and his own desperate situation proved too powerful. 7 years, he admitted, the words seemingly pulled from him against his will. "Since the ancient text revealed the ritual to transfer divine essence through royal blood, and my illness, administered gradually through your evening wine, untraceable, debilitating but slow, allowing time to position myself as essential to the kingdom's stability." Each confession brought gasps from the assembly. Officials implicated in his schemes attempted to flee, only to be detained by royal guards stationed at every exit. Throughout this extraordinary trial, Nefertari had worked her way to her father's side. Ramose embraced her briefly, his eyes full of pride and regret. "I never meant for you to face such danger," he whispered. "I am my father's daughter," she replied simply. "Uncovering truth is in our blood." Their reunion was interrupted as Princess Nefertari, the true princess, now definitively identified, approached. "Your family has served Egypt at great personal cost," she acknowledged. "Such loyalty deserves recognition." The questioning of Amenhotep continued, each answer more damning than the last. The scope of his conspiracy unfolded. Court officials bribed, rivals poisoned, temple resources diverted to personal enrichment, and always, at the center, his obsessive desire for the power he believed was his divine right. As the final testimonies concluded, Pharaoh signaled for the symbolic scale to be brought forward. On one side was placed a feather representing Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. On the other, a small clay heart representing Amenhotep's soul. The verdict was never in doubt. The scale tipped dramatically, the heart plunging downward under the weight of the priest's crimes. Amenhotep, former high priest of Amun, Pharaoh pronounced, "You are condemned for crimes against Egypt and her people. You shall be stripped of titles and position, your name struck from all monuments and records." The priest, still affected by his own potion, slumped in defeat. Even in his drugged state, he understood the sentence. A punishment worse than death for an Egyptian, the complete erasure of his existence from memory and history. As guards prepared to remove him to the palace dungeons to await final judgment, Amenhotep's gaze fixed on Nefertari. "You could have had power beyond imagination," he said, his voice barely audible. "Instead, you chose the architect's path, building rather than ruling. A daughter's loyalty to a disgraced father." "I chose truth," Nefertari replied. "Something you sacrificed long ago." In that moment, with judgment rendered and justice served, the weight of weeks of fear and deception lifted from her shoulders. Whatever came next, the priest's reign of manipulation had ended. Dawn broke over Thebes, painting the limestone buildings in hues of gold and amber. The Nile flowed serenely, indifferent to the night's dramatic events that had altered the course of Egypt's future. In the royal palace courtyard, Nefertari stood beside her father, both still wearing the simple garments of their recent stations, she in scribal robes, he in a laborer's tunic, as they awaited the royal audience granted them. 3 days had passed since Amenhotep's fall. 3 days of testimony and investigation, of officials confessing complicity or proclaiming ignorance, of temple records being examined by royal scribes. 3 days during which father and daughter had begun the delicate process of reconnecting, of healing wounds inflicted by necessary deception. "I should have found another way," Ramos said quietly, watching the palace servants prepare the audience chamber. "The risk to you was too great." "There was no other way," Nefertari replied. "My position inside the temple walls was essential." She smiled faintly. "I am stubborn like my mother. Would you have stopped me if I had known your plan from the beginning?" Before he could answer, Princess Nefertari approached, now dressed in the full regalia of her royal station. The simple linen of her temple visit had been replaced by fine pleated fabric and elaborate jewelry befitting her rank. "Pharaoh will see you now," she announced. "He has reviewed all testimonies and reached his decisions." They followed her into the audience chamber where Pharaoh sat upon his throne, looking stronger than he had during the Jubilee ceremony. Court physicians had confirmed what Nefertari had suspected. Once the priest's poisons were removed from his diet, the god-king's health had begun to improve. Ramos, once royal architect, Pharaoh addressed him directly. 8 years ago, you brought accusations of corruption against members of my court, accusations I dismissed as the desperate slander of a man caught embezzling royal funds. Ramos bowed his head, accepting the painful recounting of his disgrace. "Evidence now confirms your accusations were true," Pharaoh continued. "The corruption you discovered was orchestrated by Amenhotep and his allies, who then framed you to discredit your claim." A court scribe stepped forward, unrolling an ornate papyrus bearing Pharaoh's seal. By royal decree, the scribe read, "Ramos, son of Nocht, is hereby restored to his position as master architect of the two lands. All property and honors previously stripped from him are returned in full measure. His name shall be restored to the monuments from which it was removed." Murmurs of approval rippled through the assembled courtiers. Ramos remained kneeling, momentarily overwhelmed by the vindication he had sought for so long. "Rise, architect," Pharaoh commanded. "Egypt has need of your skills once more. The Temple of Amun requires purification and redesign after Amenhotep's corruption." As Ramos rose, Pharaoh turned his attention to Nefertari. and the daughter who risked her life to expose treason, what reward would be fitting for such service to the throne? Before she could respond, Princess Nefertari stepped forward. If I may suggest, Father, the royal house has long needed a capable scribe with knowledge of medicinal arts, someone who can recognize poisons as well as prepare remedies. A royal scribe? Pharaoh considered the idea. Yes, that would be appropriate, unless you have another preference, daughter of Ramos. Nefertari thought of the temple records room, of the power that came from documenting truth, of her mother's legacy of healing knowledge. I would be honored to serve the royal house in such capacity, Great One. With formal matters concluded, the gathering shifted to a celebratory feast in the palace gardens. As servants distributed wine and delicacies, Nefertari found herself approached by Keti, now dressed in the uniform of the royal guard. The commander offered me a position, he explained, noting her surprised expression. Apparently my skills at appearing loyal while working against authority impressed him. A valuable talent, she acknowledged with a smile, though perhaps less necessary in honest service. Across the garden she spotted Senet deep in conversation with the royal spy master, her decades of careful observation clearly valued. Nearby, Simeon, released from temple service, sat with the elderly Hebrew man from the dungeon, Eleazar, both now treated as honored scholars rather than captives. As evening approached, Ramos led Nefertari to a quiet corner of the garden, where a small shrine held a familiar statue, Merit, her mother depicted as a scribe with healing herbs, honored among the household deities of the royal family. She was royal physician before she married me, Ramos explained, seeing Nefertari's confusion. When I was disgraced, her image was removed from the palace shrines. Now she returns, as do we. Tears filled Nefertari's eyes as she placed a small offering of flowers before her mother's image. The family circle, broken for so long, felt somehow complete again, despite Merit's absence. Later, as they walked along the palace ramparts, overlooking the city, father and daughter paused to watch the sun setting over Thebes. The same crimson light that had illuminated their separation now blessed their reunion. What happens to Amenhotep? Nefertari asked. He journeys to the western oasis quarries, Ramos replied. A lifetime of labor with his name and titles stripped away. For an Egyptian, especially one so obsessed with legacy, a fate worse than death. They stood in companionable silence as darkness gradually claimed the city, thousands of household lamps flickering to life across Thebes like earthbound stars. We begin again tomorrow, Ramos said finally, his architect's mind already envisioning new creations, new possibilities. Yes, Nefertari agreed, thinking of scrolls yet to be written, knowledge yet to be preserved, a future reclaimed from the shadow of the past. We begin again.